Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Sunday, March 12th, 2017 edition of VR News. Rounding the bend of the weekend, almost being over. About to start the new work week, but let's get into some VR. Stave off the work week a little longer. I want to talk about a company called Finch. These guys have 3 controllers on the go right now. And we've looked at probably around a dozen haptic gloves in the last year. The problem for a lot of people with those gloves is the fact that they're literally gloves. They touch your hand. They generate unwanted heat a lot of the time. They serve as a reminder, a tether to the real world. What I like about Finch's controller, and they're calling it the mobile VR controller, is it's essentially a wristband portion with wires that don't run along your skin. They arc out and away to ring-like devices on your fingers. Certain fingers, not all of them. It's just a little design tweak, but I think is going to do a lot for immersion, right? Unless, of course, you're strange like me and I can't stand jewelry. Watches, rings, it just irritates me, right? So probably wouldn't help me much, but I can understand how, compared to gloves, it's going to do a better job. Now, these, and it's a minimalist approach as well. 10 plus hours of constant use is what they're advertising on this. And they actually have a pre-order open, $238 US plus shipping. You can go to the Finch-VR.com website. That gets you a controller for each arm, Bluetooth adapter, charging cables, the SDK and API, and 3 demos. Those demos are the ones that figure prominently in the trailer video, which I'm going to have linked. The caution here, of course, is the fact that these guys are going to require developers programming for the device. And I've mentioned before, haptic devices that require programming but can fall back on maybe audio cues, right? Explosions, bass, whatever. That gives them some usability beyond stuff that is programmed directly for them. Unfortunately, that doesn't appear to be the case here. It's all or nothing. So just something to keep in mind. Next up, for those of you in the UK, the PlayStation VR bundle, not only available, but £23 off. So if you were on the sidelines because of cost, even if it was just a little bit, because let's face it, this isn't a huge discount, but hey, £23 is £23, and they do have stock. So if you are in the UK and you were waiting for a bit of a price drop, that may or may not be enough for you. Next news, Google and their job listings that they've recently posted, their last batch. What's interesting is what postings tell you about a company, or what they can tell you. About half a year ago, they went through a batch of these that we talked about on the show. And at that time, most of the ads were geared at research and development, something in progress. This batch is concerned with more the distribution, okay, it's done, now we got to get it out there. So you've got positions. One of the positions they're looking for is a hardware validation manager, which is basically quality control / supply chain all over it. So interesting, because it seems to indicate that there's something that they're working on. Either that, or it's an existing product, maybe a new version, etc. But my gut tells me something new and exciting, so hopefully that's the case. And we find out, I would guess, probably around summer as we get towards the holiday season. The next news story, this one is interesting. It's from VentureBeat.com, and it talks about startup failures. And most of us know that statistic. 50% of all startups fail within 5 years. And there's one for restaurants that's equally grim, if not more so. This is a checklist that VentureBeat had for someone staring down, having to shut down their company. And it indirectly ties into virtual reality because they supply a checklist. Because we're faced with that in VR, and it's going to be a reality moving forward. It already has been. November, we saw 2 360-degree platforms shutter up. So the checklist, things to do when you're facing that. Find a competitor, possibly to acquire you, right? Or maybe a customer, vendor, supplier. Selling the assets that you've been working on if acquisition isn't an option. Customer accounts, consider maybe selling those or doing something with those. Now, careful on that one. I urge extreme caution. In Canada, for example, we have very strict privacy legislation. I talked about that a few days ago. You cannot just give your customer records or sell them to somebody else. That's a huge no-no, right? Not sure what it is in other companies, but if they don't have that type of legislation, could be worth something. Data they've generated throughout their lifespan, inventory, of course, and placement for employees elsewhere. Now, where this kind of ties in is using that example again of the 360-degree company shutting down. They didn't have a product so much as a platform. So I doubt that's going to live on. But when we look back 10, 15 years from now, and why I use that expression or that snapshot of looking back 10, 15 years from now is I've been able to do that with the arcade industry and other older guys and gals, same thing. You can look back and have experienced an industry from start to either it's still here or it died off along the way. And that's what's so interesting about VR here. What if that 360-degree company wasn't just a platform, but it was a technology that made 360 better, but they couldn't make it work? Well, that's where in the checklist, right, selling your assets. A perfect example of that is 3D effects. They were the biggest video card hype machine responsible for, bringing 3D acceleration, making it a thing. We haven't talked about them. They haven't been a business for a decade and a half, but they live on. Every time you mention, read SLI, that's 3D effects. That's their baby, right? The evolution of what they brought to the table. So it's an interesting exercise. It's an interesting checklist. I'm not saying any of you are in a position like that, but it will again be interesting years from now to look back what made it, what didn't, how did it evolve. So interesting article. Next up, Hardlight VR Suit. I mentioned these guys only because we talked about them, and at that point they were close to their goal of $80,000 with about half the allotted time left. Well, they busted through the 80,000. They're at 130K. So essentially, funding is a go for these guys. If you supported them, I'm not saying anything's bad going to happen. You could be very happy. I just want you to be, cautious. Still do your research and keep in mind that with 11 days to go, it's not permanent. You can yank your money out anytime if you have any kind of concerns, right? Again, they may be successful. Just throwing the caution out there because a lot of the tech-heavy ones don't succeed, and it's for various reasons. So just be informed. That's all. Do your research. And if you have, fantastic. Next story. This has to do with the topic of adult entertainment, which, just like violent video games, are part of the foundation of VR and are going to contribute to its success, right? Whatever your personal feelings on the violence or, the sexuality aspect, they are there. That's the reality. This story concerns a fellow by the name of Daniel DeLallo and his partner, a former adult actress who is working on this application with him. And what he did is brought the application to the Game Developers Conference, the one that we just had. He has prior game industry experience and experience with 360-degree video innovation. So instead of being a company that just offers a foundation, like we talked about, that went out of business. He has a technology, a way to make 360 better. And he's utilizing it here in an area where, let's face it, he doesn't have a lot of stiff competition. He's got a lot of companies that are doing the old fish lens 360 that looks terrible and is more likely to make you laugh than take it seriously. So it'll be interesting to see what he brings to the table. This application is basically an adult club, and there's 3 options: clothed, semi, and no clothing, that makes an intimate experience like you would be a VIP at that club. So it's interesting. It's not going to be sold through the normal channels, but it'll be neat to see what kind of sales, if they make that public at some point, it's able to generate out there. So that is Gold Club San Fransisco VR, and link for that below. All right, guys, that is it for the weekend. For the news, the work week unfortunately starts up once again. Hope you guys had a wicked weekend, and have a good week. Cheers, guys.